Hello. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I picked up a magazine the other day. I had to go take my kids to the urgent care center. They both had sinus infections, and I had to wait quite a while for them to be seen. And while I was there, I picked up a magazine, and it was one of these. And it's called Garden and Gun. I had never heard of this magazine. But the thing that caught my eye about it was the Volkswagen bus right here. I love Volkswagen buses. I've loved them pretty much all my life. And if anything has a Volkswagen bus on it, it's going to catch my eye. And so this was the first thing I saw before I didn't even see anything up here or down here. This right here is what caught my eye. So I got a copy for myself. I did not swipe this. I promise I bought a copy for myself. This is the most current copy. This is from July 2016. And the name of the magazine is Garden and Gun, like I said. And one of the main topics in this particular issue is Southern road trips. This magazine is about the soul of the South. Some other topics in here are Return of the Avett Brothers, The Perfect Slice, A Summer Pie Primer, The Ultimate NOLA Party Pad, New Orleans, 25 Great Reasons to Get Lost This Summer, plus 5 beach drives, Inside a Landmark Virginia Garden, Quail Country's Surprising Steward. So we're going to open it up and see what we can find. I really like this picture, and it's an advertisement for Lee Industries. I have a website, www.leeindustries.com. I have some beautiful chairs here, a green one, a peach colored one, and sort of a reddish burgundy one, and a light green. I really like this with the arches here. It's like a little arboretum kind of thing. It's pretty. There are a lot of ads in here, but they're just beautiful. Like I love this one with the blue, and it looks like the beach, and you have a picture back here. I like these pillow covers. This is so pretty, the blue and the white, and a seagull feather. Here's another ad for Bermuda, and it says go to bermuda.com. Out here you may never make it back home the same. A little boat, and they're going out on the boat. This is an ad for Volvo. You have the Volvo. It's kind of like a crossover, and it's electric. You can tell because the cord running up here. And it says the all-new XC90 T8, our idea of luxury. And I guess I'm not really sure how this relates. I guess this lady's waiting for her car to charge. I don't know. She looks kind of irritated. And so you see these pictures, they're just gorgeous. I love the composition here. This couch is awesome. And it's an ad for Sunbrella Design and Performance. Sunbrella.com/metro. I really think it's pretty cool. This is an ad for the Omni Resorts. OmniHotels.com. Discover how a change in scenery can change you. And they have some features here. These are the featured items in this issue. This is Volume 10, Issue 3, July 2016. On page 90, we have Great Southern Road Trips, Shoreline Rambles and Music Trails, Seafood Shacks and Literary Shrines, Throwback Motels, Drive-Ins, Fish Camps, and maybe even a few mermaids. Our Guide to Four-Wheel Summer Adventure. And on page 104, we have the Plantation Broker. When some of the nation's wealthiest buyers want to own a pristine piece of the Red Hills' extraordinary quail country, they talk to John Kohler, but first he wants to make sure they plan to keep it that way. On On page 112, we have summer slices. Nothing makes summer in the South even sweeter like a homemade pie. From fluffy watermelon chiffon to fresh-picked blackberry to peaches and cream, here are your new standbys. On page 120, Wild by Nature. The painter West Fraser has spent 4 decades steeped in the sand and salt marsh of the Low Country, determined to capture its beauty while he still can. Page 126 is Home Sweet Home. After snatching up an Atlanta cottage smothered by decades of skunk vines and neglect, a writer and her family find out what it really takes to make a house a home. It's an ad for Rolex. It's very nice. Some of the watches I think are kind of big and tacky, but that one's nice. Yeti coolers. And some very colorful shoes by Austin Hiller. Let's skip to page. Here's an editor's letter. Pat Conroy was an awesome author. Remembering Pat Conroy, the spirit and generosity of one of the South's most beloved voices. I was in bed on the night of March 4 when I got a text message from a friend letting me know that Pat Conroy had died. Just weeks before, I had reeled at the news that Conroy had pancreatic cancer and now he was gone. I immediately got up and started rereading some of my favorite passages from his work. I began with this one. To describe our growing up in the low country of South Carolina, I would have to take you to the marsh on a spring day, flush the great blue heron from its silent occupation, scatter marsh hens as we sink to our knees in mud, open you an oyster with a pocket knife and feed it to you from the shell and say, "There, that taste. That's the taste of my childhood." I would say, "Breathe deeply," and you would breathe and remember that smell for the rest of your life. I was fresh out of college and living in New York City when I got around to reading my first Pat Conroy book. He had just published Beach Music, and the media, including the magazine where I worked, were ravenous in their coverage. While fact-checking the piece we were running on Conroy, I called in most of his earlier books. I was immediately intrigued by a fairly slim memoir called The Water is Wide that chronicled Conroy's time in Daufuskie Island in South Carolina, teaching the local Gullah children who knew little of the world beyond their island sands. I had grown up in Savannah, not too far from Daufuskie. I may be pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry. I blazed through it in a couple of days. Next, I devoured The Lords of Discipline, which is my favorite Pat Conroy book. I actually wrote a book myself. It's on Amazon. I never really did anything with it, but it is there as an ebook. And I named one of my characters after a character. I used the last name of a character, one of my characters from the Lords of Discipline. Followed by the great Santini. Finally, I thought here was someone who understood the rhythm of the tides, the smell of pluff mud, the stateliness of a 200-year-old live oak, and the South in all its complexity. Many years later, I heard about a new magazine called Garden and Gun, based in Charleston, South Carolina. The premiere issue's cover showed Conroy standing barefoot in a garden pond. And soon thereafter, I escaped New York to work for G&G. In 2013, I finally had the opportunity to meet Conroy in person. He and his wife, the novelist Cassandra King, were in town for an event, and they agreed to stop by the office to talk about their latest books. And while we had a wide-ranging and spirited discussion about their work, what I remember most is the way Conroy treated people. As soon as he arrived, he started popping into offices, introducing himself, and asking questions with genuine interest in each person's life. Here was one of the South's most revered writers, and he wanted to hear about us. "That's Pat," said King with a smile. He was especially giving toward other writers. Bronwyn Dickey, the daughter of the late James Dickey, not only credits Conroy with getting her career off the ground, but also remembers him as a constant source of encouragement. This past year, when I finally finished the manuscript for my first book, I was hesitant to send it to Pat. But not only did he read it, he sent me a 3-page handwritten letter about it, Dickey says. I've never met any writer so generous with his time, so lighthearted about the craft, and so ferociously loyal to the people he loved. Pat Conroy is buried in a Gullah cemetery on St. Helena Island, South Carolina, forever a part of the low country he cherished. This was written by David Di Benedetto, who's the senior vice president and editor-in-chief of the magazine. Here we have a section about some of the contributors. Peter Miller advertisement. Doesn't really say what they sell. I'm assuming it's clothes or sunglasses or hair gel. I don't know. Something's obviously not razors. Let's see here. Aflac ad. Highway Bites. That's some sweet potato fries right there. I know that. And pimento cheese. There's no reason to drive hungry in the South. We've rounded up some of the best local fast food joints for those times when you need a quick fix on the road. Whether it's a saucy Milo's burger in Atlanta or a fried chicken stuffed behemoth from Biscuitville in North Carolina. Look at that lobster. Ooh. Talk of the South. This is about the Avett brothers. And there's a lot of wonderful stuff in here. Like, for example, we have this section here on beans. It's called Magic Beans. Butter beans and bacon blend with tarragon and cream in a Georgia chef's French accented succotash. And here we have the recipe for this. French style succotash serves 8 to 10. The ingredients are 2 cups of butter beans, fresh or frozen, 1 tablespoon unsalted butter, a half a cup, about 5 or 6 strips of thick cut bacon cut into 1/4 inch lardons, 1 small sweet onion finely chopped. We're starting to get Vidalia onions, and it's about that time of year where you can get Vidalia onions, and they are so good. I'd put them on everything. 3 celery ribs chopped into 1/4 inch dice, 1 medium-sized red bell pepper seeded and cut into 1/4 inch dice, 2 cups of corn kernels, fresh or frozen, 2 large cloves of garlic minced, 4 scallions, white and green parts finely chopped, 1 cup of heavy cream, 2 tablespoons of fresh tarragon, roughly chopped, plus extra for garnish, 1 tablespoon of kosher salt, a half a tablespoon of black pepper. And here's the preparation after you have all your ingredients together. Bring 1 quart of well-salted water to a boil in a large stock pot or Dutch oven and add butter beans. If they're fresh, cook for about 4 minutes. Frozen beans will need to cook for about 8 minutes. Test for tenderness and then remove from heat, drain, and set aside. Meanwhile, over medium heat, melt the butter in a large skillet. Add the bacon and cook until crisp, about 7 minutes. Stir in onion, celery, and bell pepper, stirring to coat with butter and bacon fat. Cook until tender, about 5 minutes. Add the corn, garlic, and scallions and cook an additional 5 minutes, stirring occasionally. Gently fold in the butter beans, then add cream, tarragon, salt, and pepper. Reduce heat to medium-low and cook uncovered for 5 more minutes or until succotash is heated through and the cream has started to thicken. Taste and adjust seasoning if necessary. Sprinkle with additional tarragon before serving. I'm sorry, that wasn't the succotash. This is the succotash right here. And these are I guess this is just a picture of your ingredients right here. And this is what it looks like when you're all done. It actually does look really good. It looks better than the regular type of succotash. That looks really yummy. My father's ham. And I knew without even seeing that had to be about Virginia. Virginia is pretty popular for their ham. Smithfield, Virginia, and other areas, but makes me think of Smithfield, Virginia. I think we'll read that one. It sounds interesting. Okay. And this is in the traditions section of Talk of the South. My father's ham. Like many a Southerner, the writer William Styron, and William Styron's another one of my favorites, he wrote some really awesome stories. Writer William Styron found joy and solace in a Virginia staple. And this was written by Alexander Styron. It's interesting. On Tuesday, January 19th, a massive fire erupted at Edwards, Virginia smokehouse in Surrey, Virginia. The flames moved quickly, engulfing the red clapboard building in a fierce instant. Mercifully, it was lunchtime, and most of the Venerable Food Company's employees were out on their break. No one was injured, but the blaze reduced the smokehouse to cinders. I was home in Brooklyn when I heard the sad news. Just a few weeks before, at Christmas time, I'd shown my mother how to go online and order a petite ham, already cooked and suitable for our family's smallish holiday gathering. We had it with biscuits Christmas Eve alongside fried chicken and mashed potatoes and peas. There was plenty left over for sandwiches the next day, and is still enough for picking as the old year gave in to the new. Like everything I've ever had from S. Wallace Edwards and Sons, our ham was salty, toothsome, irresistible. That it might have been our last is a thought I'm loath to contemplate. As I write this, Edwards is thankfully taking steps to rebuild, but it's unclear exactly when the company will return to its pre-blaze output. And oh, what would my father say? Born in Newport News, Virginia, Bill Styron spent most of his life in exile from the South. After a stint in the Marines and graduation from Duke University, he hightailed it to New York with dreams, soon enough fulfilled, of becoming a literary star. While in Rome on a fellowship a few years later, he met and soon wed my mother. They returned to the States, bought a house in rural Connecticut, and there my father lived and wrote for more than 50 years, until his death in 2007. He didn't sever his roots. In fact, much of his best work, Lie Down in Darkness, The Confessions of Nat Turner, A Tidewater Morning, I love that story, relied on the strength of his Southern identity. But he definitely assimilated. I don't remember a lot of talk about the old country in our house, and there certainly wasn't any nostalgia for the more bitter truths of his Jim Crow era childhood. My siblings and I grew up full-fledged New Englanders. We skied, rooted for the Red Sox, and cracked lobsters freshly plucked from icy coastal waters. But 3 or 4 times a year, my father would prepare an Edwards wigwam ham, and we would dogleg deep into the heart of Dixie. Oh, there's William Styron. The hams hung from a hook beside our kitchen sink. 20-pound wonders, salt-cured, dry-aged in sheets and tan canvas adorned with a zigzag motif. My father always had one at the ready, ordered by phone in the days before the company mailed catalogs, and eons before the internet. Edwards was and remains a family-run operation. S. Wallace Edwards got his start selling ham sandwiches on the Jamestown, Scotland ferry. His Surrey smokehouse opened just across the James River from Newport News in 1926, the year after my father was born. When Dad was still a boy, his mother died after a long battle with cancer. I've always imagined the local delicacy like Proust's Madeline, evoking the warmer memories of his complicated youth. Holidays were not exactly my father's favorite time. He hated the chaos and dreaded the parties my mother planned, with their guest list that grew like kudzu. Eventually, though, his hospitable spirit emerged. He brought in firewood, prepared the wines, mellowed, and grew merry. But really nothing got him quite into the groove like his preparation of a Virginia ham. The brown sugar glaze was concocted with loving intensity. He checked and rechecked the oven, brought a craftsman-like approach to cutting the meat. If you passed through the kitchen and were open to an apprenticeship, you could expect to give up a chunk of your day to a garrulous tutorial on the direction of the grain and how exactly to lay the slices on the platter. But by then you would have missed the first key step in the wigwam experience, soaking the ham, usually for days. It was a desalination process that also sloughed off impurities like mold acquired during the months of postmortem aging. Needless to say, it drew out some of the swine's more God-given humors as well. When I was very small, I sometimes slept in my older sister's room on Christmas Eve. One year, after shuffling into her bathroom for a late-night pee, I caught sight of something so horrifying I practically levitated off the toilet and down the sloping hall. "Daddy," I hollered in the dark of my parents' bedroom, "there's a dead man in Polly's bathtub." It took many shuddering minutes before he could convince me that it was the Christmas ham I'd seen beneath the murky water. 14 years ago, I married a man with Southern roots. Every Thanksgiving, we fly down to his parents' farm in LaGrange, Georgia. My sister-in-law bakes pies and drives them over from Charlotte. But since Delta doesn't make much space in the overhead bin for prepared foods, I order an Edwards ham. It's a nice family tradition, something to pass along. I don't know what we'll do this fall. Well, that is sad. I hope they get started up again soon. Here's the recipe. And it looks like a black walnut-based sauce. Secret sauce. A Chesapeake chef brings a lost recipe back to life. As far as Deidre and Phil Armstrong were concerned, the stand of black walnuts on the edge of their 6-acre farm at Harvest Time Herbs in Staunton, Virginia was a nuisance. The tree's shallow roots played havoc with the mower. The nuts that rained down at harvest time were an ankle-turning hazard. And then there was the aggravation of shelling the darn things. They were the bane of our existence, Deirdre says. Instead, the Armstrongs focused on cultivating herbs and chili peppers. But Jeremiah Langhorne saw something different. I've been visiting Harvest Time for 10 years, says the chef who opened his Washington, D.C. restaurant, The Dabney, to acclaim late last year after a stint at Sean Brock's McCrady's in Charleston, South Carolina, where his foraged finds often end up on the menu. I'd gotten black walnuts before, so I knew about the trees, and I asked if I could gather some leaves. Black walnut leaves have a very interesting smell, as do the green outside when it first falls off the tree, but you got to watch it. My aunt has a gigantic black walnut tree at her house, and when those things start to fall, you don't want to be under that tree. Sorry. Langhorne traces his roots deep in the red clay soil of the Shenandoah Valley, and he wanted his new restaurant's menu to draw inspiration from native regional ingredients, including the black walnut. The stately trees shade neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., form enormous swaths of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and dot woods as far west as Texas. While poring over a well-worn claret-colored tome with a title that tells it all, Housekeeping in Old Virginia, containing contributions from 250 of Virginia's noted housewives, distinguished for their skill in the culinary art and other branches of domestic economy. Langhorne found a recipe that intrigued him. There, on fragile pages between mushroom ketchup and walnut ketchup, were the curious instructions for bay sauce, made from the leaves of the black walnut tree. You always hear about things made from the fruit, Langhorne says, but rarely the leaves. First printed in 1879 and reprinted dozens of times since, Housekeeping lists its contributors alphabetically in the front of the book. 3 are named Langhorne, each related to the chef. I thought it was interesting, and in some way everything started to make sense. Like why I'm interested in cooking, he says. It was a nice bit of inspiration. The sauce has nothing whatsoever to do with the Old Bay seasoning used on Chesapeake blue crabs, and like many 19th century recipes, it offers room for interpretation. There are scant directions, amounts are measured by the handful, and instructions demand bay sauce, spend time in the sunshine, followed by a long rest. Langhorne gathered leaves a few times during the summer, layering them with a concoction of horseradish, onion, salt, and spices, then drowning them all in plenty of vinegar. For 2 weeks at a time, he mothered the jars, placing them outside to let sunlight and heat work their magic. Then captured the sauce, mysterious, blackish, and funky, pressing the thick marsh against a sieve and siphoning it into glass jars. The first taste was acrid, beyond bitter, and so salty. He wondered if it would ever be edible, so he set the jars in the refrigerator to rest. The sweet spot occurred 6 months in the young green leaves gathered last June. Balanced and umami rich, the result was reminiscent of Worcestershire sauce, though not as pushy. Bright, acidic, briny, vinegary, but also deeper and woodsy. It's delicate now that it's mellowed out, Langhorne says, riding that bitter line, but with a great bite at the back of the throat. Start a batch now to have ready to sprinkle over next winter's oysters. The flavor is well worth the wait. Or stop in at the Dabney, where Langhorne uses bay sauce widely in dressings for vegetables, sauces for fish and shellfish, and in a particularly lovely beurre blanc that puddles luxuriously around rockfish. It's a dish 137 years in the making. And here we have the recipe for black walnut bay sauce. And I actually did not know that you could do anything with the leaves. That's really interesting. 6 cups of young, freshly gathered black walnut leaves rinsed. 1 yellow onion, roughly chopped. 3 tablespoons of fresh wild horseradish, grated, or an equal amount of jarred horseradish. 2 tablespoons of fresh ginger, minced, or an equal amount of powdered ginger. 1 tablespoon of garlic, peeled and minced. 2 tablespoons of ground allspice. 1½ teaspoons of ground cloves. 3 tablespoons of kosher salt or J.Q. Dickinson cooking salt. 1½ teaspoons of ground black pepper, and 2 quarts of apple cider vinegar. And for the preparation, wear gloves while working with walnut leaves to avoid staining. Wash and dry the leaves, and working in batches, finely chop them in a food processor. In a large mixing bowl, stir together the onion, horseradish, ginger, garlic, allspice, cloves, salt, and pepper. Place a layer of chopped walnut leaves on the bottom of a half-gallon jar that has been washed in hot soapy water, rinsed, and left to air dry. Press a layer of the onion mixture on the top of the leaves. Continue for 3 or 4 layers until you've used all the leaves and onion mixture. Add the vinegar slowly, running a knife or a chopstick around the outside of the layered mixture to allow the vinegar to seep down into the bottom of the jar. Work deliberately until the leaves and onion mixture are thoroughly saturated and remain submerged. Wrap the top of the jar with plastic wrap. Seal and place outside in a protected spot where it will receive as much sunlight as possible. Leave the jar outside for 12 to 21 days. Strain the mixture through a fine mesh sieve lined with cheesecloth into jars. You'll get enough for about 5 8-ounce jars. Dispose of the solids. Seal and date the jars, then place in the back of the refrigerator or another cool, dark spot for 6 months. Refrigerated, the sauce will keep indefinitely. That's really interesting. I had no idea that you could do anything with the leaves on a black walnut tree. That's pretty cool. And this magazine is just full of really interesting stuff. It has all kinds of articles on cooking and travel, and just, they have some hunting stuff. Not as much the hunting stuff as other stuff, but quite a bit. Okay, read this. I love poetry, so I like to read this. And I've already read a lot of these. I didn't read the entire magazine, but I did have time to read quite a bit. This is the In the Garden section. Poetry of Place. How a Family and Community Came Together to Preserve a Cultural Landmark in Virginia by Steve Russell. The ideal way to stroll through the Lynchburg, Virginia garden of the late poet Anne Spencer is alongside her granddaughter, Shawn Spencer Hester. In her company, it's even easier to connect with the floral paradise that once charmed such visiting African-American luminaries as Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Martin Luther King Jr. Sometimes I hear visitors say they feel a certain energy here that cannot be verbally expressed, says Spencer Hester, who remembers catching lightning bugs in the garden as a child. She moved back to Lynchburg from Washington, D.C. in 2009 to be closer to family and her grandparents' multifaceted legacy. The shingled 2-story Queen Anne that Edward Spencer, Anne's husband, built in 1903 functioned as the birthplace of the local NAACP chapter. Still, it's the backyard that may have offered even greater inspiration. In that narrow, deep triangle, Anne fashioned an Eden that belied the turbulence of her time. Barely literate at age 11, she went on to graduate as valedictorian from Virginia Theological Seminary and College, now Virginia University of Lynchburg. And as a young bride, nurtured twin passions for writing and gardening, transforming her weedy lot on Pierce Street into a showplace. This is beautiful. This looks like something my grandmother would have done. She loved growing things, and she could grow anything. She had such a green thumb. This looks exactly like something that she would do. She would love that. The Spencers created a succession of formal and informal spaces that shifts focus from swaths of foxglove, lilac and peonies to manicured boxwood hedges to many-hued roses, aloha, Spanish beauty, climbing crimson glory. 20 elaborately turned posts support a massive wisteria-entwined pergola painted a striking robin's egg blue, and a matching arbor of grapevines. Gravel paths converge on a circular pond shaded by a robust, white-flowered deutza shrub and accented with Prince Ebo, a fountain in the likeness of an African royal's head, a long-ago gift from the renowned activist W.E.B. Du Bois. We've had relatives say that my grandmother even hybridized her own variety of black poppy, but we haven't found it, Spencer Hester says. Edward built Anne an arts and crafts influenced cottage in the garden's midst, bordered by distinctive Virginia greenstone. From the desk inside, she watched her blooms and followed her muse, often scribbling verse on seed catalogs. Anne's poetry, considered part of the Harlem Renaissance arts movement of the 1920s, is permeated with imagery from the natural world and the Bible, reflected in titles such as Lines to a Nasturtium, God Never Planted a Garden. The words she wrote in this lovely spot eventually made her the second African American included in the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry. But Anne Spencer was no shrinking violet. Indeed, she earned a reputation for refusing to surrender her seat on segregated Lynchburg trolley cars. She was feisty, Spencer Hester says, so her garden was a good refuge. And this is where she came to think. It was her place to get away from the goings-on Pierce Street and beyond. Even when Spencer was in her 90s and could no longer tend to the garden, it was no less a preoccupation. She'd sit on her sun porch and look out here, Spencer Hester says. It was getting overgrown, but she still saw it as beautiful and perfect. Consider these lines, penned shortly before her death in 1975. Turn an earth clod, peel a shaly rock. In fondness molest a curly worm whose familiar is everywhere. Kneel, and the curly worm's sentient now will light the world that tells the poet what a poem is. Absent its mistress, the garden fell into weed-choked neglect. Then in the early 80s, Spencer Hester's father, Chauncey, himself notable for being a civilian member of the Tuskegee Airmen, approached the local landscape designer Jane Baber White about a restoration. White in turn recruited her garden club, knowing full well the cultural significance of adopting such a project in Lynchburg. This was a world divided, White says. No member of the Hillside Garden Club had ever been here or probably even heard of Anne Spencer. This was huge from a social and racial perspective. Of course, the color that counts most in a garden is the green of one's thumb, and the Hillside ladies got theirs plenty busy, using 1937 photographs as their blueprint right down to the trio of double-decker Martin boxes atop 20-foot poles. They cut back decades-old roses, still healthy at the root, so new growth could flourish. They unearthed and nursed original bulbs at their own homes until the soil was prepped for their return. Many of them still bloom today. The project took 2 years, and the club has maintained this space for the public ever since, preserving a unique spot to learn about Spencer's cultural and horticultural legacies, or to just linger and read a favorite poem. I think the only thing that's missing is that black poppy that Anne grew, White says. We had real hopes of finding that poppy. We still do, Spencer Hester counters. You never know. We might walk back there tomorrow and find it waiting for us. Oh, that's really cool. And there's just so much good stuff in here. Oh, this was a good story. I read this. It's kind of long. It's called Good Dog. It's really funny. Good Dog by Taylor Brown. Creature Comfort. A spirited bird dog keeps a young couple afloat. We stared at the battered bungalow we'd found on Craigslist. The landlady said it was once a whorehouse. This was in Asheville, North Carolina, and we assumed she meant in the old days of Thomas Wolfe, when such establishments were more commonplace. Never, my friends, assume. Whelan, our rescued bird dog, zigzagged the yard nose to ground. My girlfriend and I had just towed a trailer loaded with dog beds and dream boards and IKEA furniture from San Francisco to the mountains of North Carolina, where I would later write the first draft of my novel about two kids lost in a cold, dangerous world, with nothing to depend on but each other and one remarkable animal. I didn't know how much the story would be ours. I watched Whelan checking the perimeter of the yard, fenced in chain link. Suddenly, he went into full point, a furry arrow aimed at something hidden in the woody kraken of a vine snarling through the back fence. My heart roared. Whelan, can you think of a better name for a dog? His soulful eyes had called out to us from a tiny thumbnail, no more than 150 pixels square on petfinder.com. Say what you want about internet dating. I say destiny can ride those rails. We'd driven 9 hours north of San Francisco to the high desert of Oregon to meet this dog who'd skewered our hearts. Our apartment didn't even allow pets. Whelan and his brother Willie, of course, had been dumped by a breeder at the only no-kill shelter in miles, run by a silver-haired man with an eye patch. Both dogs were German wirehair pointers, bred to sale. The one-eyed man said they were lucky. Sometimes breeders took the run into the woods and shot them. Whelan's neck was scabbed from an embedded chain. He was mangy and sick. You could see his ribs. His face, long and bearded like a Civil War colonel's, looked as if it had witnessed whole ages of sadness and strife. Maybe it had. Dog years are long after all, and some souls are old. The shelter staff had never heard him bark or growl or cry, not a peep. It would be 2 weeks before he spoke to us, and this in his sleep. 2 months before we had his giardia and mange under control. He was the runt of runts, and he was the handsomest creature we had ever seen. Back in Asheville, Whelan came off point, waiting to see what we would do. The provenance of the house was off-putting, sure, but we wanted a place with character. Oh, we got it. There were mice in that house, and ants, and drafts, and ghosts. There was a creepy basement that flooded when it rained, a creepier attic, and neighbors who hinted at poisoning Whelan if he barked too much. We were accosted by meth-eyed men. I saw 7 arrested in front of the house in the first 2 weeks. One attacked with a drain pipe. I kept a shotgun just inside the door. On good days, we sat in a blue plastic kiddie pool and drank box wine while Whelan scouted for possums and moles and a giant groundhog rumored to live in the vines out back. He caught the same baby possum 3 times. 3 times it played possum, truly, and gentle-jawed Whelan dropped it living and unhurt at our feet. On bad days, Whelan leaped at hooded men who taunted him from their side of the fence, and we feared one would stick a knife through the chain link, silencing the dog, who threatened the business of selling twist-tied bags of crank. I'd been whittled to the bone before the cross-country move, but didn't realize it. I had had a very high-stress job in California for years, writing when I wasn't working. I'd quit that job to strike out on my own. Suddenly we had little money and fewer friends, and fall came. It felt like the whole world went cold. We were anxious, depressed, anxious again, but we had Whelan. We watched him patrol the fence while the trees rained gold. His coat was brown, brindled like a faint dust of snow. His hair was wiry, spangled with fallen leaves, his beard so long and old. He was our weapon against the shadows behind the fence, against sadness and doubt and pain. He was our warmth on the cold nights, our joy machine. My girlfriend's mother, a dour member of Old Guard, New Orleans, came up for Thanksgiving. Her boyfriend brought his Colt 45 to dinner. He'd heard about our street. A mouse scurried across the floor during the meal, and I thought my future ex-mother-in-law's head would explode. I'd brought her daughter to live in this place? Whelan scrambled after the mouse, his pursuit curtailed only by a dangled sliver of fried turkey. Meanwhile, I pursued the rodent from room to room with a traffic cone in tow. He stuck close to the baseboards, but when he darted across the living room floor, I dropped the cone over him like a blaze orange witch's hat. I slipped a length of cardboard underneath and began carrying the trapped critter outside. When I pushed through the screen door, I realized everyone was following me. They followed me onto the front porch and down the steps and into the yard, passing the turkey fryer in the driveway. They stood behind me as I knelt and freed the mouse near the base of the fence, through which he could flee and be forever rid of the Civil War colonel, disguised as a dog who wanted so badly to eat him. When I looked up a miracle of smiles, we moved to a small cottage in Black Mountain and built a fenced yard for Whelan. He was diagnosed with elbow dysplasia that spring, but even lame at times, hopping on 3 legs. He never quit smiling. His separation anxiety back then was terrific. Once he managed to press his head through the wire bars of his crate, actually breaking the welds. We found him half strangled, bleeding, a smile locked on his jaws. See how much I love you? I know, brother, I know. All this time we were working to make our way to the coast. Somehow that seemed the answer to our problems. In 2011 we moved. We got married, a golden week, then separated 6 months later. We'd been together 7 years. I think we'd struggled so hard, so long, we hadn't had time to think about our own relationship. I think we could have endured anything together, any hardship, but being happy was something else. We decided Whelan would go with Kristen. He was always a mama's boy at heart. My last day with Whelan, I took him to a secluded spot on the sound side of Wrightsville Beach. Here we'd helped him overcome his fear of the ocean, carrying him out to deep water and making him paddle back. I wanted him to know these were our last hours together. He just wanted to swim. Kristen and Whelan moved to Houston. I helped them load the U-Haul trailer. Watched them drive away on a cold morning in January. Whelan rode shotgun, his pink tongue slung like a pennant in the wind. He didn't know. A year later I cried. I'd seen a video montage of their first year without me, mainly shots of Whelan. It hit me like a sledge. I knew what it was to be a ghost, to watch life unfold without you. And yet I was happy because they were happy. Whelan was smiling in every shot. I went back to one of my favorite books, like you do, The Dog Stars by Peter Heller. The end of book 1, and I read the words again and again, making them my own. Whelan, little brother, my heart. I say your name often. I say it now. Whelan, you handsome son of a bitch. You saved us more than we ever saved you. I just thought that was a neat story about that dog. There are so many really neat stories in here. I am going to subscribe to this magazine. I've already filled out a subscription card and sent it in. I don't have time to read really anymore, and now it's pouring down rain. So, but it's a fantastic magazine. It's just so nice. And here we have some guns, garden and gun. Due south, travel and adventure for the southern soul. It just started pouring down rain out of nowhere outside. This is beautiful, this engraving right here. My dad does metal engraving. And it's fascinating to watch people do this. And he does it by hand. I've never seen him do anything quite that elaborate, but some of it is just absolutely beautiful. But he enjoys doing that. My dad was a gunsmith pretty much my entire childhood, and he learned metal engraving, and he would build rifles. I mean, just from the bottom up, he could build. He even built a rifle for left-handed people that opened sideways. It's really awesome. But, like most magazines these days, there are a lot of ads in here, but amongst all the ads, there's some really great stuff. And, so like I said, I've sent in a subscription for it, so I'm going to keep getting this. It was $5.99, but the subscription I think was like $18 for a year. You might be able to go online if you're interested. It's called Garden and Gun, and you might be able to subscribe online if you're interested. But yeah, it's got, look at that old Bronco. It's got great stuff in it. And it's a pretty good size magazine. So, just something to consider if you like to read stuff like that. Great recipes and stories and editorials, and it's just really cool. So I look forward to getting more. And if you're interested, perhaps I could make some more videos where I go through and read, just select a few things and read it. And I hope that you have a great day. And I hope to see you again sometime. Thank you for stopping by.